Hi, everybody. It's Chrissy, and I am here with Kelsey Casselbury. She is the person we're interviewing today for our Cool Job series. And Kelsey is a magazine journalist. Kelsey, could you go ahead and introduce yourself? Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Hi, well, I'm so glad to be here today to share with you all what I do for work. I am a freelance writer and designer and editor, and I write a lot for magazines and also for websites. You might have heard of a few of the magazines I write for. One around here that a lot of people know is What's Up Annapolis, What's Up West County. Another one that I write for that probably people haven't heard of, but it is a national magazine. It's called School Nutrition Magazine, and it talks all about the meals that are served in your schools, and it is written for the people who work in your schools and feed you breakfast and lunch. I've also written a lot about weddings, and so I have written for a magazine called Virginia Bride and another one called Arizona Wedding. In fact, I started my career as a magazine journalist in college by working at a magazine called The Knot, which is also a website, and it helps people plan their weddings. And that is how I got started as a magazine journalist.
Very cool. If my video pops in and out, I apologize. I'm having a little bit of lag here. I think as we were talking about earlier, everybody is trying to access Google Classroom today here in Anne Arundel County because all the kids are doing their first real day of online learning. So I apologize if the video cuts out. Kelsey, if we have any questions from the audience, anybody viewing, we do have a couple of viewers right now. So Kelsey will answer your questions. I'll bring them up on the screen. So just ask away in the comments if you're on Facebook Live, and I will post them on the screen and we'll ask Kelsey. But in the meantime, I have lots of questions for you. So my first question is, how did you get into writing? How did you get into magazine writing?
Sure. So the first step in becoming a magazine writer is, of course, as so many jobs are, getting the right education. So I have a degree in journalism from the Pennsylvania State University. When I was at school at Penn State about 13 years ago now, I worked for the Daily Collegian, which is the student newspaper. And after I graduated from college, I started working at a newspaper in Salisbury, Maryland called the Daily Times. When I was younger, I thought that I really wanted to work for newspapers. I really liked the daily deadlines and the atmosphere of being in the newsroom. After working there for about 3.5 years, I realized that I actually liked to work for magazines a lot more. Like I said, I did an internship in New York City between my junior and senior year of college at the Knot. And so after about 3.5 years of working at the newspaper as a copy editor and a page designer, I applied for a job at What's Up Annapolis magazine and was hired as their food and weddings editor. I worked there for another 2.5 years before I started working for some other publications. And about 2.5 years ago, I decided that I was ready to take the leap to be a full-time freelance writer. Now, what that means is that I'm not on staff for any magazine or publication, but I write for a lot of different websites and magazines and publications as what's called a contract.
Okay. So how many are you writing for right now?
Well, as a freelancer, you never really know how many clients you're going to have at any given time. I'm very lucky that I have about 4 what we call anchor clients. Those are people or publications that I know that I'm going to be writing for usually day in and day out. I have monthly assignments from them. But then at any given time, I can also be working on 2 or 3 or 4 other clients' work at the same time. They're just not giving me regular work. Those are more of one-off assignments.
Okay. So what are some of your favorite things? I know you write about weddings and food and some other things. What are your favorite things to write about?
Yeah, so my career has gone in multiple directions. When I started as a writer, I wrote, like I said, a lot about weddings. I don't write a lot about weddings anymore. When I became the food editor for What's Up, even though I was doing weddings at the same time, I found that I really loved to write about food. At the same time, I started contributing to their health section, and then found that really food and health are my favorite things to write about. So as I moved on in my career, I started writing a lot more about health. I still write a lot about food, but then I also, as a freelancer, went back to What's Up at a later time and became their contributing health editor. So at this time, I would love to write about health. That's probably my favorite thing to write.
Health, okay. And then when you're writing for the web, because you also said you write for websites, are you writing the same kind of stuff, or are you writing different things for websites?
No, it's mostly writing about health and food. I write a lot for a website called Livestrong, which probably a lot of people have heard of. And for them, I write a lot about nutrition and fitness. And they give me, the way it works as a freelancer is that an editor will give me a topic to write about. And I take that topic and I do all the research. I call sources and I write an article for them on the topic that they have given me.
Okay. Now, I know a lot of kids have to do research when they're in school. What are some of the sources that you use? And what are some sources that aren't good to use? Wikipedia.
Sure. Well, Wikipedia is a good place to start. Now, you
Right.
don't want to use that as your main source because, like most of you know, it can be changed really easily. So you don't always know if something is right. But it's a good place to start with your research so you can get a good overview of the topic, and then you can start researching specifics in that topic. Also, if you scroll down on Wikipedia to the very bottom of the page, there's a lot of really good resources. That's where they got their information from. So Wikipedia is called a secondhand resource. When you're writing something, especially something that's going to be given to your teacher, you want to use firsthand resources. The best thing you can do, and this is what journalists typically do, is talk to a person who is an expert on the topic that you're writing about. They've done a lot of research of their own, they've been educated, and those are called primary resources. So that's what I do. I typically find people who are experts in the field that I'm writing about. For example, if I'm writing about running, I write a lot about running because I write a lot about fitness. I'm going to find someone who is a certified personal trainer, who is a running coach, who maybe has competed in running competitions, who has a degree in kinesiology. Those are all really good sources for writing about running. You can also look for what are called scholarly articles. These are really important for health websites or for health writing. You want to look for articles that scientists have published about the topic that you're writing about. And they have been what's called peer reviewed, which means that other people who are experts in their field have looked at it and deemed that it is a good study, it is a good article, and gives good information.
Great. Okay. And what are some ways that you find, are you really good at using Google, or do you have other methods for finding some of these primary sources?
Yeah, I'm really good at using Google. I forgot to say, not a good article or not a good way to research. On the internet, anyone can publish anything that they want. So that means that you don't want to just go on any website and decide that, oh, look, they're saying that this is true, so I'm going to put that in my paper. You want to make sure that you can find reputable sites. That might be, for like going back to health, that might be websites like the Mayo Clinic or the National Institute of Health, the Cleveland Clinic, Harvard Medical School. Those are all really good sources for health writing. For food writing, you might want to look at the Culinary Institute of America. You might look at, a chef's website, the James Beard Association. Their website might be really good for finding people that you can talk to. You don't want to just go on any website because you never know who's written that article.
Right. Okay. That's good. That's very good advice. What about, should you just copy and paste from those sources that you find and put that into your paper?
Of course not. That would be plagiarism. And just like your teachers are not going to allow you to plagiarize articles, you're not allowed to do it in real work either. There's lots of people who will read your writing, and if it's copied from somewhere else, they'll know, and you'll lose all your credibility as a writer. So what you want to do is you want to go to a ton of different sources, and you want to compile information from a variety of sources. You want to write it, and do all your own research, and then you want to write it in your own words. You might be able to take inspiration from other places, but you never want to copy.
Okay, good advice. And I was asking a leading question because we want to make sure that the kids know that the copying and pasting is plagiarism. And so they shouldn't be doing that in their papers, because some of them don't realize that.
You know what the best thing is when you're writing, especially this is when you're writing a news article or what we call a feature article, you're going to do a combination of direct quoting. So that is taking, when you put something in quote marks and you attribute it properly to a source, you know, when you say that Harvard Medical School says, quote mark, so on and so on and so on, close quote mark, that's not plagiarism. That is directly quoting from an appropriate source. But you have to give credit.
Mm-hmm. Right. Okay. And you probably shouldn't have your entire paper be quoted, like quotes from other sources.
You want to paraphrase. You want to take a lot of information and you want to paraphrase it into your own words.
Right. Okay. Now I have some questions. Some Girl Scouts are doing their Amuse Journey badges. And so they sent some questions that I'm going to ask you. And so the Girl Scouts, if you're watching, these are the questions that your troop leader sent me. So the first question is, are you in a male-dominated field?
I'm not in a male-dominated field. There was one time when newspapers really were dominated by men and publications in general were dominated by men, but in the specific publications that I've worked for, it's actually been quite dominated by females. I've had a lot of female leadership. I've worked with a lot of female bosses. In fact, I'm pretty sure 90% of my bosses have been female, which has been a wonderful thing as a young writer to work with established, experienced female leaders. They've given me a lot to look up to, and a lot to work towards.
Okay, great. And have you ever confronted a stereotype in your line of work about yourself or others?
That's a great question. I think, you know, yeah, actually, so there is a stereotype that I think a lot of times when I tell people that I'm a writer, I think they assume that I am maybe a novel writer, or I'm a writer and I really just sit at home all day and don't do a lot, especially because I work from home. I don't go into an office every day. A lot of people might think that I'm not really doing much, that I'm just at home watching TV and maybe I type a few words here and there. I'm working on my novel. Not that novel writers don't work hard, because they really, really do. But a lot of people assume when I say I'm a writer, they think I'm a novel writer, and I'm not, because when you're a writer, there's a lot of different career paths you can get into. You don't just have to write a book. So sometimes I have to make sure that people know that, no, even though I'm working from home and I do have a lot of flexibility with my schedule, which is amazing. It's one of the reasons I love what I do work really hard. I write thousands of words every day. I'm doing a lot of research, a lot of phone calls. I even travel a lot, which a lot of people don't realize that a freelance writer can travel a lot.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Let's see. Have there been other women in your field who paved the way for you?
Absolutely. I have won my magazines. There is an editor. Her name is Patty Fitzgerald. She is the editor of School Nutrition Magazine. She's been editor of that magazine for 25 years. When I started writing for School Nutrition in 2012, I wasn't directly under her. At the time, I was what's called a communications specialist, which means I didn't work directly on the magazine. Eventually, I was promoted to managing editor of that magazine, and she has become a real mentor for me. She's taught me a lot about good writing, and she's taught me a lot about how magazines work, and she's just done a lot for me.
Okay, great. Now, you also mentioned earlier that you are also a designer. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So let me grab my magazine here. I happen to be a graphic designer as well. I started, like I said, at a newspaper in Salisbury, Maryland, and I was hired as a copy editor and a page designer, which meant I designed the pages of the newspaper. Even though my work is probably 70% writing now and editing, I still do a lot of design work. I love to design, and so I design a magazine called Ken Matters. This is one of our issues that we put out earlier this year, or I think it was last year. And that is a magazine from the American Chemical Society. If we have any listeners or watchers who are in high school, they might even get that magazine in their high school chemistry class. And so I work with an editor, a managing editor, who does all the editorial work, and then she sends me the articles, which then I put onto the paper using a program called InDesign.
Very cool. So what are some things that you had to study to learn how to do graphic design?
So I am a self-taught graphic designer. There is a lot of education out there for graphic designers. You can major in graphic design in college, and that is a great way to get into the graphic design career field. It just happens that I majored in journalism, and then I was taught by people at the magazine that I worked, or I'm sorry, at the newspaper that I worked with when I was younger, how to do graphic design. And then I have just continued to work to hone my skills over the years. I've taught myself how to use the Adobe Creative Suite. I also have an Etsy shop where I do digital prints and digital invitations. It's just a lot of practice. You know, the saying might be cliche, but practice makes perfect is absolutely true for everything in life. So I practiced a lot in graphic design, and I just keep trying and keep learning. There's a lot of resources out there, such as LinkedIn Learning or Skillshare, all those like online classes that they have opportunities to teach you how to do stuff that you maybe didn't learn how to do in school.
Mm-hmm. Okay. When you so we get a link. So sound good?
You start over. You broke up a little bit there.
Oh, sorry. When we're done, I'll send you a message to get the link to your Etsy shop so we can post that in the comments.
Great.
All right. So another question that we always get is you said you were a journalism major in college. What are some things that you study as a journalism major?
As a journalism major, you're going to start with the basic classes that, you know, everyone takes. You're going to take English 101, English 102, but then you're going to go into more specialized classes that are focused on journalism. So some of the classes that I took were news writing, and that taught me the basics of how to write a news article that answers all the questions that you might have when you're reading a newspaper article. I took classes on copy editing. That copy editing is a fancy term for when you proofread an article and you make all the corrections for grammatical errors and spelling errors. You also do things like help the writers figure out what the best way to phrase their article is. That's what a copy editor does. Okay. A class on magazine writing, because magazine writing is actually quite different than newspaper writing. A lot of times magazine writing, you write longer articles. You write what are called feature articles, which means that they're softer news than the hard news articles. Let's see, what else did I take? I took a lot of classes on writing and a lot of classes on editing.
Okay, so if a kid is really interested in writing, this might be something that they could do as a career.
Yeah, journalism, even though, you know, you hear a lot about the news industry is dying and there aren't jobs for journalists anymore, that, you know, that might be true. There's not as many jobs as there used to be, you know, 15, 20 years ago. I happened to graduate right in the middle, or right at the beginning of the recession in the late 2000s. So I experienced firsthand what it was like to work at a newspaper when everything was kind of going downhill. But those skills are so transferable. If you are a good writer, you are going to be able to get a job almost anywhere because every place needs good writers.
Great. So another question. Do you ever? This is a question that we get asked by my son every time. Do you ever write about animals? Do you write anything about animals? He loves animals.
Yeah. Well, there's a lot of publications that do focus on animals. Just yesterday, I was reading to my 6-year-old son. We get National Geographic Kids every month, and we were reading about koala rescues. Unfortunately, that is not what I write about. So I can't say I've ever really
breaking
written
up now.
about.
Might be my internet.
Yeah, I can't say I've ever really written about animals. It's not what's called my beat. A beat is what is the topics that you typically write about. So if someone asked me what my beat was, I would say my beat is health and food.
Health and food. Okay. Yeah, my son's obsessed with animals, so I always have to ask animal related questions.
National Geographic is a great magazine if you like animals.
Oh yeah, definitely, definitely. So do you ever work with photojournalists? We had a photojournalist on last week. Do you work directly with photojournalists?
I used to work directly with photojournalists a lot when I worked at a newspaper. And even when I worked at a magazine, excuse me, when I worked for What's Up Annapolis, I worked very closely with staff photographers that would go out and take photos of the articles of, the people and the places and the things that I was writing about. As a freelancer, I don't work directly with photojournalists quite as much. I typically just contribute the what's called the copy, which is the text of the magazine article, and then the editor that I am giving it to, he or she is usually the one that talks straight to the photojournalist to get what we call the art for the article.
Okay, very cool. So you do have to, even if you're not working with them, you're still indirectly working with the photojournalist to make a cohesive article with photographs and all the visuals.
Absolutely, and even though I'm a freelancer now, I have worked as the managing editor of a publication, and when I was the managing editor, it was my responsibility to work with the writers and with the photojournalists to put together an article that illustrated and read about the topic that we were writing about.
Okay. Now, can you tell us about a particular article that you wrote that was especially interesting or exciting or really one that you is very memorable to you?
Well, I had an experience very recently that I think is going to stick with me for a very long time. And you mind if I tell you about that?
Yeah, go ahead.
I've written a ton of amazing and interesting articles over the years, but I had an experience this past month that I think is really going to stick with me for a long time. I write, like I said, for School Nutrition Magazine. And we have plans for our April issue. Magazines often work many months out. So you're really ahead and prepared. So you're not doing everything last minute. That's very important in magazine production. And I had been working on my topics for the magazine articles. And it was on March 12th, my editor gave me a phone call and she said, Kelsey, I don't think we can write about what we plan to write about in the April issue with this coronavirus pandemic going on. We need to scrap everything. We need to start from scratch. And we're going to release a special issue about COVID-19. So she gave me the assignment to write a Q&A about COVID-19. So kind of a primer for people who still weren't sure, at the time what it was and what was going on and how it spread. But the kicker was we had to do it all in about 12 days, which is a really quick turnaround time to do a whole magazine that's about 72 pages long.
Wow. That's a lot.
And it helped me. I got to understand a lot more about the disease that was going around. One of the things I love about being a writer is that I learned so much about the different topics that I'm assigned, things that I never thought I would know about. I've written about goats. I've written about bison. I've written about, all these just different things that I guess I have written about animals.
Yeah, exactly.
But unfortunately, those were more of a food topic.
Right.
But I got to bison farms and goat farms to do that. And, I never really thought that I'd be writing about those topics. So.
Oh, I think my Wi-Fi is starting to futz out again. So again, people, I apologize if I start to sound garbled or anything. My Wi-Fi isn't very good today, so I apologize. People watching, if anybody has any questions, please comment them, and I'll ask Kelsey your questions for you. If you want to ask later, I will tag Kelsey so she can, and I'll send her a link to the video, the live, not the live video, the rebroadcast or the replay of the video. So if you do have any questions, then maybe she can answer them after the live broadcast. So I just have a couple more questions for you before we wrap up. How is it different writing for a magazine versus writing for a newspaper? What are the differences there?
Yeah, so newspaper, you have a lot less space. to work with. You know, if you look at a newspaper, you'll see that most of the articles are probably around 500, maybe 600, 800 words, sometimes even less than that.
Oh.
You're reading for a magazine, you often have a lot more space. You're typically writing anywhere from 1,500 to 3,000 words. Now, of course, there's exceptions, both on the newspaper and the magazine side. Sometimes you can do a feature article in a newspaper and you're going to be writing 1,000 or 2,000 words, but that's unlikely. You don't have a lot of space because there's only so many pages. Magazines, you have a lot more space to do that. Although sometimes you're writing what's called departments. Those are the shorter articles that are up front in the magazine, and you're only going to be writing 300 or 400 words for that. Another thing is you just have a lot more flexibility when you're writing a magazine article versus writing a newspaper article. Newspaper articles, this is something that you learn in college when you're writing classes. They often have a fairly strict format. They have what's called the lead. That's the first sentence or two of a news article. And then you have what's called a nut graph. That is going to be the purpose of the article. With a magazine, a lot of times you're not following that similar structure. You kind of have more flexibility to write how you want to write.
Cool. So I'm starting to lose my internet again, so I'm going to wrap this up a little bit. So I do have one more question, and hopefully my internet will hold out long enough for me to get the answer for it. What is your favorite type of thing to write? What is I know you've written a lot of different things, but newspaper, magazine, web. Is there one in particular that you enjoy writing the most, or it's like asking you to pick your favorite child. But is there one type of writing that you prefer to write?
I like to write for magazines the best. I like it's hard to explain why, but just when you ask me that question, I just say magazines are where my heart lies.
Okay, that's good. So it's good that you're a magazine writer, right? So Kelsey, I appreciate you hanging in there with me with my my connectivity issues. And everybody, thanks for watching. I will post the link to Kelsey's Etsy shop. So if you want to get any of her graphic design work, you can. And so Kelsey, again, thank you for everything. And it was a pleasure interviewing you.
Thank you so much, Chrissy.